So our only review for this week, because it is our 100th episode, is Glass. This is the newest film from writer-director M. Night Shyamalan. So in 2000, he released Unbreakable, which was sort of a downbeat deconstruction of the superhero comic book movie genre, long before it reached the craziness of superhero movies that is today. Nonetheless, this film I found was pretty interesting in the way it used comic book mythology to tell a story about depression in a very realistic world. It was like a more serious, dramatic version of Kick-Ass about a decade before that film would come out, and I think it was 8 years before Mark Millar would write the graphic novel. So then in 2017, fast forward, Shyamalan released Split, which ended up being a surprise follow-up to Unbreakable because it exists in the same world. Split was about a serial killer with multiple personalities and one superpowered animalistic persona called the Beast. And the twist in that film was that, spoilers for Split, this Beast character, played by James McAvoy, would be a proper villain for Glass, the movie we're getting right now, against David Dunn, also known as the Green Guard or Overseer. He has a couple of different names. And he's, of course, played once again by Bruce Willis. And sure enough, we now have Glass, which reintroduces the Samuel L. Jackson character from the original film, Unbreakable. Elijah Price, or Glass, however he's describing himself as the mastermind in between these two forces of good and evil. For a lot of the time in Glass, all three characters are in a mental institution under the care of a psychiatrist, Dr. Staple, played by Sarah Paulson. And we have a brief clip here where she's in her office discussing the three superpowered men with their respective loved ones. David Dunn's son, who I believe is the same actor from the first Unbreakable.
He is.
Elijah Price's mother, same actress. And the Beast's former kidnapping victim, again, same actress from Split. Here is a clip from Glass.
Listen to me, Joseph. Your father is making great progress. I'm very hopeful for him.
Did you know the first Superman couldn't even fly? And Metropolis is actually New York City. And what about all the coincidences in what I was reading?
Comic books are an obsession. Have you ever been to a comic book convention? They sell teen TV shows there. They are selling things. Your friends and family members have lost their perspective. Your dad is trying to fight her abductor. Your son is trying to best his dad. He's the anarchist. He's the brains. He's the reluctant hero. This all sounds very familiar, doesn't it? Comic books are not valid history.
All right, that is from the film Glass, which is now in theaters. So we have a lot to cover with this movie, but start us off, Chris Evangelista. What was your entry point into Glass? Were you a fan of Unbreakable and Split going into this new one?
Yes, I'm a big fan of M. Night Shyamalan in general. I pride myself on being sort of like a stan, as the kids say, of M. Night Shyamalan, where even when most people had turned on him, I was still pretty much all in. I feel like it was around like The Village is where people started to just be like, all right, we've had enough of this guy. And I think The Village is fantastic. And even
I was gonna say, you have a great piece about The Village at Slashfilm. I just wanted to shout that out and encourage everyone to read that.
Yes, thanks. And even The Happening, which I acknowledge is a dumb movie, I still like enjoy watching it. So I was happy about he's had this like mini comeback. You know, first there was The Visit, which I liked, and then there was Split, which I really liked. And as for Unbreakable is, I think, his best movie. So I was pretty excited about this when it was announced, and you know, when the trailers came out, all that stuff. So I was looking forward to it.
What did you think then? What did it live up to your? It sounds like you had pretty high expectations.
I did, and man, was I! This is probably the most disappointing movie I've ever seen. I don't know what happened. I don't know what the hell went wrong, and I found this movie to be so bad that it actually made me like have like a existential crisis, in the sense that I was sitting there in a theater and I was like, have I been wrong this whole time? Is M. Night Shyamalan actually a terrible filmmaker like a lot of people claim he is? And have I just been mistaken? Like, what is going on here? I'm baffled that the same guy who made Unbreakable made this movie, because it's almost like he forgot everything he did with Unbreakable to make this. And I don't know why? I was sitting in the theater just being like, why are you doing this to me, M. Night Shyamalan? I felt personally attacked.
All right, so we're going to get into some of those specifics. Very curious to hear what it was about the film that didn't quite work for you. So, Will Ashton, I know one of the first times you and I, when we did our prototype episode for Cinemaholics, it was the conversation you and I had that we published on a different podcast right before the first episode of this one 2 years ago. We talked about Split, and I re-listened to that episode. Yeah, you don't act surprised. I told you I did this. And,
no. I was surprised that was 2 years ago. I just time is what
I see. Okay. It doesn't feel all that long ago that Split came out, and famously or infamously, I was not a fan of Split, so I have a kind of a different entry point from you, Chris. But Will, you kind of liked that one a little bit, right? I mean, you definitely had some mixed feelings, but it sounded like on the whole you thought it was a worthwhile experience. So that was your entry point. And then you also said in that show that you had never seen Unbreakable. You have seen Unbreakable for the first time. First of all, what did you think of that one, and how did that affect your experience with Glass?
For sure, yeah. I actually just watched Unbreakable for the first time, I think hours before I saw Glass. I don't know why I held off for so long to see Unbreakable. I really don't know, but I'm so glad I did, because that was really, really good. I should have seen that a long time ago. But yeah, I mean, I think that might be, it's between that and Sixth Sense, but I think that might be his best directed film. And I really think that's a showcase of what Shyamalan can do behind the camera. So I was pretty amped up, and I rewatched Split after I saw Glass. So my feelings about the film are still about the same, I think, from that episode that you're talking about. But Glass, the thing that stuck out to me the most was that, considering how much the film was building up, like it's been almost 20 years, like all this build up and stuff for the sequel to Unbreakable, and all the stuff that's related to Unbreakable feels weirdly kind of half-assed in this movie. It's kind of more of a sequel to Split than Unbreakable, which I guess makes sense considering that Split came out relatively sooner, but I just don't really know, like Chris was saying, what was going through Shyamalan's head as he was making this film. I don't know if just like the anticipation, like just combining these two films together ultimately just made the film rather disjointed, or if he just was kind of just given carte blanche to do what he wanted, and this kind of ultimately what it became. But I'm similarly disappointed, but I don't know if I'm quite at the same level of disappointed as Chris, so I can certainly understand why you feel that way.
Yeah, I'm definitely disappointed in this one, and I didn't even like Split, but I do agree with both of you that I think Unbreakable, I also think it's probably his best film. I think that one is so well paced. It has a cadence to it that is so interesting and psychological. I like what he's doing with superheroes. He's doing like psychological superhero movies that delve into questions about mythology and the stories we tell each other, and interesting ideas about comic books. But I have to agree that I think that when you see Glass, it's almost like none of these ideas crystallize into anything larger than themselves. And like we heard it in that clip. Yeah, right. Well, even in that clip, just hearing Anya Taylor-Joy sort of mouth off things about superhero comics, like they're these big revelations, that to me sums up a lot of this movie, a lot of like self-serious, reflection on comic books that just the timing doesn't feel quite right for me. But Chris, getting more specific, I mean, what was it about this one? Were there things in it that did work for you, or was there like a certain moment where things kind of fell apart, or was it just the whole way through it was just not a good experience?
I liked the first like 10 or 15 minutes. I was like, all right, this is pretty good. And I liked James McAvoy's performance for the most part. He's all in here. He's playing this character with dissociative identity disorder, and he's essentially playing like 24 different people at once, and he's really good at doing that. Although I feel like it gets to a point where it gets exhausting, where there's literally a scene where he keeps changing personalities every like second, and it got to the point where I was like, all right, stop, I get it, I know what this character is, I don't need to see this anymore. But beyond that, I feel like almost nothing works here. Literally almost nothing. For one thing, Bruce Willis is just phoning it in, and that's something he's been doing a long time now. That's his his go-to mode seems to be, just sleepwalking. But, Shyamalan was able to get really good performances out of him. I mean, his performance in The Sixth Sense might be like one of the best of his career, and he's really good in Unbreakable. And I had hoped that reuniting with Shyamalan, playing that character again, it would wake him up, and that didn't happen. And he's barely in it. Like he ends up getting locked in his cell, and there's like a 45-minute stretch of the movie where they don't even like focus on him. And so that was like, why even make this an Unbreakable follow-up if you don't really want to go back and focus on his character, which was the big point of Unbreakable. And, there's just so much here. It's going to start sounding like nitpicking if I run down the list, but I'll put it this way. Like this movie, I think it ruins Unbreakable for me. Like every time I rewatch Unbreakable now, I'm going to be like, I have to remember how this movie ended. And I don't give away spoilers, but it ruins what was so good about I think a lot about the ending of Unbreakable, where not the twist part, but the part where Bruce Willis and his son have that moment where they're at the dinner table and he gives his son a look where he's like, yes, I am a superhero. And the son looks amazed. And Shyamalan even has like a flashback of that in the end of this movie. And that's such a powerful, poignant moment in Unbreakable. And you contrast it with what happens to David Dunn in this movie, and it's like, like what bullshit? I don't know why you would do that. So yeah, that's where I stand.
I definitely don't understand what they were going for with a lot of the character relationships in general here. I do think David Dunn and his son is still one of the things I like most about this universe. And to what you're saying, we don't get a lot of it. We get some of it in the beginning, and then some reference to it over the course of the movie. And then what we're left with is some of Glass, but he doesn't show up much until the third part of the film. And when he does come onto the scene, I want to give this film credit for letting Samuel Jackson just own his part in this, because I do think those are some of my favorite scenes, is when Glass is allowed to be his character, not giving anything away. It's, in the trailer that he becomes more of a presence, and it's the name of the movie. But then you have this one character relationship that is so abysmally bad that I just cannot give this film a pass. It is the one between Anya Taylor-Joy's character and the Beast. I don't know if you guys agree with this, but there's something that rings so false to me with this character relationship and their motivations for each other that makes me wonder, did something happen in Split? Was there a deleted scene or something that I don't understand? Because there's some sort of bond between them that I didn't think was there. I don't know. Will, did you pick up on that, or are you going to disagree?
No, I found that kind of weird as well. I think what he was going for is that she connected to Hedwig a little bit, like the child in him, and Kevin as well. That's like kind of trapped inside there. I think that's what he was going for, but it's not really portrayed too well. I agree. It kind of comes out of nowhere. It's just like, this feels more scripted than natural to the story. So I can get behind what you're saying.
I think there's a lot of that where I just don't think some of these characters go well together. There's something about the whole dynamic of Split that for me just doesn't connect with the Unbreakable story. It feels like movies sort of colliding instead of sort of meshing well together. And it's a shame, because I really like movies like this where strong personalities are just bouncing off of each other. And you barely get that. You really don't get a lot of good psychological conversations between the Beast and David Dunn, for example. It's really just the Beast and Dr. Staple, and then the Beast and itself and things like that. And I was found kind of wanting with some of that trio sort of being together. They're together, I think, once in the film, and yeah, it didn't quite work for me. But okay, so Sarah Paulson's character, I'm sort of undecided on this one, Chris. This whole angle, and again, we can't give anything away, but this whole thing that they're trying to do, her whole motivation is to try to convince it's gaslighting. They're trying to convince these superpowered people they're not superpowered. I have a feeling you didn't like that, since you said a lot of it fell apart for you, but what was it specifically about this part of the film that didn't work?
So I like this idea a lot, and I feel like this idea would have worked better in Unbreakable, but here we've already had 2 films where we know, David Dunn has superhuman strength and the Beast is the Beast. And it's pointless to keep hammering this point home that, oh, they're not who they say they are, because it feels like it's wasting time, because we already know the truth. And it takes up such a huge chunk of the movie that it starts to become tedious, where you're just thinking, we know the truth. When is everyone else going to find out the truth? I don't want to spend this much time being, gaslit, like you said. And, I like Sarah Paulson. I think Sarah Paulson is a phenomenal actress. I don't think she nails this role right. And I think it's not really her fault, because the character is written in this way where, I'm tiptoeing around spoilers here, but she's written in a way where she's not exactly who she says she is. And I think she had trouble trying to find out how to play the character, because she's sort of sympathetic, but she's not. And it didn't work for me. And I was most disappointed about that, because I was excited about her being in the movie because I like her so much, but her character just never really works.
I'm going to say something a little controversial. I know, Will, you're probably going to be surprised that I'm saying this, but I will say, and something you said kind of reminded me of this, but a lot of the things I usually don't like Shyamalan for are in this film. And I actually didn't mind them as much in this one. So one of the main ones is the sort of expositional clunky dialogue. There were only a few times in Glass where I was kind of annoyed, or I was feeling like I was, giving I was knocking the film down a few points for that sort of thing. And also the POV shots. For whatever reason, and I've complained about this for years with Shyamalan, but in this one, that directing style kind of worked for me. And even though I didn't like it at first, upon thinking more about it, I do kind of like what he was going for with these action scenes and how he filmed it and how he made them feel. It is very awkward and it is sort of unwieldy, and you don't really get the sense that it's a superhero movie. Even though during the film, I was a little bit like, oh, this is weird. Afterward, I think I liked it a little bit more. What do you think, Will? Am I nuts?
Yeah, I mean, I can get what you're saying about exposition as films. It can be a little heavy-handed and clunky, but I never really had an issue with his POV shots, to be fair. I usually kind of find them kind of effective, but I really usually for me, it's just like some of his dialogue can be what bothers me. And there's a couple scenes in this where I found that to be kind of tedious, particularly the scene with Shyamalan himself in it, where he took a whole segment of the film to be like, I'm going to tie my cameos together. This is what I've been up to. And he gives his little cameo an arc, which I don't know.
I chuckled. I did chuckle at that.
There's a part of me that kind of respects that. Shyamalan is just like, I'm just going to do this because I want to. But at the same time, it's just like kind of like what Chris was saying. Just this movie feels like it stalls a lot. Like it just kind of feels like it's like in a series of rendering. Like it just constantly just kind of spinning its circle, like getting to the thing that it wants to get to, which is basically the ending. Which, I mean, I will say that when, without giving anything away, when McAvoy and Samuel Jackson kind of get together, there was like that thrill for me where it's like, okay, here we go. Like, this is where it's going to get like what I'm looking for. And I think it starts kind of fun. And I do like that the climax is where it is. Like, I do like that kind of sets itself up to be like something else, and it ultimately is restrained. But ultimately, yeah, I find myself kind of wanting with this film, and I'm glad I'm not alone in that regard.
Yeah, I don't think you're alone at all. And at the same time, we haven't mentioned this, but there are some outliers, and I've found some critics and some film people who I deeply respect who do connect with this film and consider it worth your time and really enjoyed it. I don't understand where they're coming from, but giving them sort of the benefit of the doubt, I do think that this film's going to work for some people and for some audiences, but it is the typical Shyamalan where you really don't know how it's going to sit with you unless you give it a shot. I think if you're at least mildly interested in what this is, if you liked Unbreakable, I don't think, unlike Split, I don't think it's a film that like it didn't provoke a very extreme reaction out of me. I just sort of walked out of Glass rolling my eyes. Split, I was genuinely pretty angry at how much I disliked that film, even though I know a lot of people really liked it. This one, I think, actually is worth checking out just to see for that just that chance that you might be one of the ones who really likes it. And I think that is a good reason to give it a shot. And it's a big hit so far. So far it's made, let's see, $40.5 million domestically off of a $20 million budget. Worldwide, it's at 89, and that's not counting Saturday totals yet, or Sunday totals, I should say. So definitely a hit for Shyamalan, and his mini comeback, as you were alluding to, Chris, is in full steam. I hope that he gets out of this trilogy now, the East Trail 177 trilogy, as a lot of people like to call it, and does something kind of new. But, you know, we've seen him do new things before, and so I say that cautiously. But let's get into our final thoughts and grade this thing. Chris, you know, if you could sum up this film, you know, really through that perspective of, should people seek it out? And if they do, what should they expect? And what's your overall grade?
I would say no, ignore this movie, but I know that's not going to happen. And I know people are going to, the curiosity factor is going to check in.
Yeah.
I wish I could say I liked it. I wish I could even say, you know, it was bad, but I sort of enjoyed some things, but I can't even get on that level. And I'm, like I said at the start of the show, I'm someone who loves Shyamalan, and I'm glad it was a hit, even though I don't like the movie, because I want him to keep making movies, and I do want him to bounce back and do something better. But this is of all of his movies that I've seen, I've actually never seen The Last Airbender or that After Earth movie. I did not see either of those. But of all the other, but I have seen all his other movies, and of all his other movies I have seen, this is the one I like the least. I even think Lady in the Water, which up till now was my least favorite film of his, is better than this. So make of that what you will. If I had to give it a letter, do you do letter grades or stars? I don't know. I'm sorry.
You can use, we usually use letter grades, but you can use whatever.
Yeah.
You want.
All right. I would probably give it, I don't want to say F, because F is like the plague. So I'm going to say D, maybe D minus. So there's some things you might like, you know, the performances. Samuel L. Jackson is very good when he finally shows up. And I do actually think the fight scenes, like you were saying, are enjoyable. I like how brutal they seem, and they don't seem choreographed. It's literally right. Bruce Willis like slamming people into walls. And I liked that. But beyond that, this was a major, major disappointment for me.
All right. And I forgot to mention too, this is 35% on Rotten Tomatoes. So most critics aren't really liking it, but the few that do are giving it some praise. The audience score, which, you know, that's kind of a tougher thing to quantify, is higher. It's like a 78%. So it's a mystery. You really don't know what you're going to think of this one unless you give it a shot. But Will, Ashton, what say you?
Yeah, never in all my days did I expect to be slightly more positive on an M. Night Shyamalan movie than Chris. But I ultimately didn't like the film, but I think I kind of respect Shyamalan for making the movie he wanted to make, even though I imagine most people are not going to be satisfied by this. I don't think anyone really is going to be like, oh, well, that's exactly what I wanted from these characters. I feel like it's a movie only for Shyamalan. And I mean, I'm glad he made the movie he wanted to make, but I just wish I enjoyed it better. But yeah, I mean, there's stuff in here I like. I like the production design. I like the last scene. And I do think the performances from Samuel L. Jackson and McAvoy are good. So I'm between a C+ and a C. I'll give it a C just because of my ultimate disappointment in the film, but I can't say I ultimately hated it.
Okay, that's interesting, yeah, because I think I gave Split a C, and I'm going to give this one a C. I do think it's like right in the middle of, I think it's going to get some very negative reactions from people, which I dread, and then it's going to get some positive ones because, yeah, there are good things in here. I do want something like this to be successful, kind of to what Chris was saying before, because it is a more cerebral take on this subject matter. And I want more of that. It really isn't the what with this movie. It's not the ideas in them. I get what the ideas are. I get what Shyamalan is trying to do. I just really think it's the execution that feels sloppy and mishandled, just in my perspective. And I think that you can do a movie like this with the budget it has really well, because we've seen that with Unbreakable. And I'm pretty disappointed as well. I'm feeling less annoyed with the movie as time goes on, to be totally honest. I think the plot holes were really just grating on me during the movie. There were just things that people were so dumb in this movie. I mean, that's a simple way to say it. And I don't like watching films where I feel a lot smarter than the people in the movie. I'm not smart enough to want to feel like that. I don't want people to be doing things that, like, everything from the security of this mental institution to their methods of keeping people contained were just weird, and they raised more questions than anything else. And I couldn't enjoy this film because of it, because it just kept putting its world building kept throwing me off. And that's a big reason why I just can't get into it. But I think if you can get sucked into the world building and sort of look past and overlook some of the weird contrivances, you might have a good time with this one. And as it's turning out, it looks like some people really are. So that's Glass.